views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hi everybody, welcome to the New Year's edition of the Bronx Buzz. Happy New Year, happy holidays to you and your family. In March of 2016, which is just a few months ago, we started the Bronx Buzz, and the idea was that we would have a reporters roundtable, get an idea of what reporters are saying, what they're reporting, and also learn a lot about them. So far, it's worked out great. Every week we've been here, we've had different reporters, we've had photographers, we've had journalists, we've had authors, and tonight we're going to take a look back at 2016 in the first year of the Bronx Buzz. And so what we're going to do is show clips from some of the best of our programs, but there were so many real good ones that we're not going to get to everything, but you got to stay with us each week to get a real good look at everything that we do. But in one of our first programs, we pretty much embodied all that the Bronx Buzz is about. Our guests were David Cruz from the Norwood News and Joe Hirsch from the Hunts Point Express and Mott Haven Herald. Take a look. It's the Bronx Buzz. It's our second program, the second time we've done this brand new program on BronxNet television. We are coming to you from BronxNet East, which is in the Hutch Metro Center. The idea for the Bronx Buzz is that we bring in reporters, Bronx reporters, to talk about the Bronx and talk about their newspapers. In addition, for the second segment, we have a Bronx Buzz of the Week, and that will be a topic of general interest, and we'll let the reporters talk about that. People will recognize me, I'd like to think, and they say, wait a minute, isn't that the guy from Bronx Talk? Yes, of course, but this is a whole new show, and as I said, it's the second time that we're doing the show. So let's get right to our reporters on the Bronx Buzz. Joe Hirsch, the editor of these two newspapers, which we are going to talk about, the Hunts Point Express, and for a very unusual moment, looks the same as the Mott Haven Herald, but we'll talk with Mr. Hirsch about that. Thank you for joining us this evening. And from the Norwood News, which is this newspaper that I have right here, it is the editor of the Norwood News, David Cruz. Nice to have you with us, Dave, as well.
Thank you.
Joe, let's start with you. So these really are two separate newspapers in total, right? The coincidence, and happily for me, these were photographs taken during my TV show because we ran the debate for the 17th Council District. But Joe, tell us a little bit about what makes both the Mott Haven Herald and the Hunts Point Express distinct.
So the Mott Haven Herald covers the neighborhoods of Melrose, Port Morris, and Mott Haven. Mm-hmm. And we have 4,000 print copies circulated per month, as well as a website. The Hunts Point Express covers the neighborhoods of Hunts Point and Longwood, and there are 3,000 print copies that run once a month along with the website. And
we really should make the distinction between your paper and, I guess, traditional newspapers because of the people who write it. Talk about the origin of it and where it really comes from, aside from the fact that it is about a couple of these or several of these Bronx neighborhoods.
The paper originated in 2006. It was the brainchild of Buddy Stein, Pulitzer-winning editor of the Riverdale Press.
Former editor
of the Riverdale Press. And Buddy had about enough of the traditional world of reporting and decided he was going to take it to the universities. And he went to Hunter College and proposed the idea of starting a community newspaper that was going to be staffed by journalism students at Hunter. He started the paper in 2006, having student undergraduates reporting and writing for the paper, and a website gradually evolved from that. And I joined the paper in 2008, and gradually I became editor of the Hunts Point Express a year and a half ago.
So all of I happen to I love all the Bronx papers, but these papers I love because the stories are written by college students, by graduate students. Right.
In the case of the Hunts Point Express, most of the stories are written by undergraduate students. undergraduates at Hunter College. And in the case of the other paper, the Mott Haven Herald, most of those stories are written by graduate students from the CUNY Graduate School of Journalism in collaboration with a class that we have at the EJ School.
You know, what I really like, and actually the Norwood News really wrote the book on this previous to David coming aboard, it's finding communities that don't have newspapers, that don't have coverage. And frankly, I talked to Buddy Stein on our other TV show, Bronx Talk, a number of years ago, and I asked him, why does Riverdale seem to do better? And he said, one of the reasons is we have coverage. Our elected officials are called to the carpet because we have good newspapers, and I'm sure, and I haven't talked to Buddy in a long time, but I'm sure the idea behind this was to take communities that are starved for coverage and see if they can do a little better.
That was the idea, and it remains the idea, that for the most part, Mott Haven and Hunts Point are underrepresented in the press. Occasionally, the dailies will parachute in when there is a story of a more salacious nature that needs covering, or when there are elections. Actually, that's not entirely the case, but at any rate,
it does happen.
There are gaps, and we try to fill in the gaps.
You know, and I will tell you what gives you an advantage over, let's say, David Cruz, who has a more limited staff. I mean, he's going to tell us about that. He works for, you know, it's a not-for-profit company that manages the paper, et cetera, et cetera. But because you have all those students, you have the opportunity to really cover what's going on out in the area. So there's a lot of diversity. Folks, I'm advertising the papers. There's a lot of diversity in these papers, and you know, I enjoy them, and I'd like to think people in the Bronx enjoy them. Let's talk about a couple of stories that you folks wrote about, and I should really look and see who wrote them so they can get credit. I always thought it was fascinating that in the Bronx we have the largest food market in the world, yet within a half mile of that food market, we have what you might call a food desert, that people can't access food. This was an article written by, I hope I pronounce it right, Somali Bikangaga and DJ Costantino. Tell me a little bit about this article, a lack of healthy food stores in Hunts Point.
Sure. So we had our reporters go out and ask people in the neighborhoods just before the election for the 17th city council district that just happened at the end of February.
Which is on the cover of both papers, and we, of course, did the debate on Bronx Talk, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. There were 6 candidates left standing before the election after 11 had initially entered, and so a week before the election happened, we sent our reporters onto the streets of Hunts Point and Longwood to talk to people about what mattered to them and what they would want to see the new city council person turning their attention to. And one of the things that people talked about was about the lack of access to healthy food. Obviously not a problem that you would expect to find if we were doing this in Soho. But in the case of Hunts Point and Longwood, as you say, it is a dark irony that not even a mile away from the residential parts of these neighborhoods, we have the country's biggest food distribution market.
Without putting you on the spot and asking you to solve all all of our problems, is there a solution to that? Let's do it. Yeah, why not?
How many do we have?
We could do it. What would be an answer to that?
Well, in fact, some of the store owners told us that it's not entirely true that Hunts Point is a food desert. For instance, the manager of a local fine fair where a lot of people go to shop. There was once upon a time a food dynasty that burned down a few years ago, and so fine fair was the main magnet for a lot of shoppers in the neighborhood. And the manager there said that in fact they do have more fresh produce than people are giving them credit for, and that food comes directly from the markets.
Maybe the most extensive coverage we did on our program, the Bronx Buzz, in our first 9 months was after the presidential election of Donald Trump. We actually did an hour-long special show about it. Our guests were Erin Clark from New York One and Marlene Peralta from Progressive Cities. And then in the second half of the show, it was David Cruz, again, from the Norwood News, and Assemblyman Louis Sepulveda. Take a look. The election of Donald Trump as the next president, the 45th president of the United States, shocking for many, surprising for many. I guess we'll start with you, Erin. Why do you think that happened? How did we get to a point, I guess, twofold? One is that nobody really expected it, and then number two, that it actually happened.
Well, I think the polling just missed something, and missed something big. You know, no doubt there are a lot of people in the country, and maybe even some people here in New York City and maybe even in the Bronx, that are just not happy about where the state of the economy is. And I think that there's definitely a group of people who voted for Trump because he's a businessman, and they think, well, you know what, he's not a politician, he's not the same thing that we've had already. Let's try someone new, and let's try someone who is a businessman. Maybe he can fix the economy because he has that knowledge of how business works. So I think that that's partially where some of these votes came from.
Do you have a sense, and I realize, and again, it's very interesting for us in the Bronx because, listen, we have no Republicans in office, in elected office. This is obviously a very left-leaning borough, maybe the most left-leaning county in the state of New York, if not beyond. Did you have a sense that there was just this immense dissatisfaction with not necessarily the politics, but the status quo? Politicians, time to bring in new people, and frankly, it reminds me of the election of Michael Bloomberg.
Oh, most definitely. I mean, we saw it in the Democratic primary with Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders lit a fire under, or behind, I should say, so many people, especially people here in the Bronx who were just sick and tired of the status quo, who wanted somebody new, who wanted somebody who they felt like listened to them. And they felt like the current politicians that we have in office right now aren't listening to them. I was even listening to our station this morning, New York One, and the person that was being interviewed was referring to Staten Island, but he was saying, you know, Bernie Sanders was able to come in and galvanize such support because he was different, and that's the same exact reason why Donald Trump galvanized so much support, in his opinion, the person who was being interviewed, because he was different.
Marlene, same question for you, and then we're going to backtrack and we're going to break a lot of these things down. But the question is, why is it such a shock, and then why did it happen?
I think we knew that it was coming, but we just were in denial because around the masses that Donald Trump attracted from before was very surprising to everybody, and he was very popular. And like Erin said, you know, there is this movement of going against the status quo, and that's what he represented. Very drastic, you know, side of the business, but yes, a lot of people were, you know, whatever he said was resonating to a lot of people, and that's what's scary. Because again, like a woman like me, a woman, a person of color, an immigrant, I mean, he spoke against everything I represent, and clearly there's a lot of people who think like him.
Let's start with the media aspect of it. Both of you are in the media, I'm in the media. And what Erin addressed, and that was that the polling missed something. There's so much to read. I mean, you wake up in the morning. I mean, there's just not enough time to even go through it. And frankly, sometimes you just, I got it, enough. But I read something this morning that said the media saw the 30,000 people that showed up every place he went, but somehow denied the fact that that was real support. That it, frankly, much like Bernie Sanders, he outdid Hillary Clinton in the Bronx. He had huge rallies in the Bronx, and Hillary was not able to join. But the media then looked at it and said, well, you know what, it can't possibly be real. I mean, is there an element to that?
Yes, the media was doomed by the polls, right? They
Doomed
were
by the polls.
Yes, and this is not the first time it happened, right? Like the media thought that people were not serious about Donald Trump, and look what happened. And I think maybe the polls did energize a lot more people to go in favor of Donald Trump. As they saw, well, if everything is pointing at Hillary, let's just go out and vote and try to, you know, get this thing stopped.
So it cast him as a popular underdog.
Yes.
And so that helped
Definitely.
to motivate people. Of course, you know, when I saw the polls along the way, I mean, and my own feeling was that I didn't believe that he could ultimately win. When I saw the polls, I always reminded myself, they're just polls. And if that's what it was, then why, you know, we could have called the election 6 months ago. We didn't have to worry about polls. Here's the question I'm going to ask. I'll start with her, and I'm going to go to Erin next. There is this suggestion, and certainly if you analyze the vote, okay, and you go through, and I'm not talking about New York or Philadelphia or you know Washington D.C. or or Detroit or Chicago or any of the big cities. I'm talking about you know Wisconsin and Michigan and Missouri and all the states in Middle America. There is a sense that whites who are working class people are, in essence, for want of a better term, a silent majority, and they were not counted and considered. And with all of the talk about Latinos coming out to vote and energizing Hillary Clinton's campaign, they were the ones that carried the day. I mean, do I have that right? That we media and America missed the boat on who those people are?
Yes, definitely. I mean, yes, I think the Democratic campaign tried to get the Latino vote and the black vote and forgot that there is a vast majority of white working class who were not even paid attention to, or they took it for granted. They took that population for granted and thought, oh, wait, let's just focus on minorities because they're the ones who are going to give us the rest of those votes we need. And what happened? Minorities gave technically those votes, but then that other population was completely for Trump. And minorities, in terms of Hispanics, we were not a whole lot more people go to vote this time.
Didn't add enough.
It was almost identical as 2012, and this is really shocking.
Yeah. Well, I also heard, again, so many numbers out there. I also heard a statistic that was that many of the Hispanics many are religious and conservative in nature, did go for Donald Trump. Erin, you covered the Bronx, so you're here, and like me, I'm in the Bronx all the time. Is it hard to understand the mentality that's going on out there that really was the mentality that drove Donald Trump to become the president?
I think for people who live in the Bronx, it most definitely is, because all throughout this election, we saw and heard from people in the Bronx, in New York City in general, who were afraid of the rhetoric from Donald Trump, who were afraid that if they were Hispanic, that they might not be welcomed. If they were Muslim, we know we have a large African and Muslim population growing here in the Bronx. If they were Muslim, that they would be surveilled in some way. People who are part of the LGBT group, they felt like their rights would be taken away. And so these people fought hard for Bernie Sanders. And then when Bernie Sanders wasn't there anymore, they still were not going to go for Trump at all. So here, when you hear that people who look like them, sound like them, are them in essence, are voting for Donald Trump, I think it's just baffling.
His background, and of course, I'm not in a position, either of you, in a position to verify charges that were out there, but clearly there are concerns about his relationships with women in the past, certainly the language that he used, his general sense of morality, and I'm going to add in the fact that he has failed businesses. He claimed, I mean, he's rich, but he claims to be a successful businessman. He, at the same time, railed against sending jobs to China, but his ties and shirts all are made in China. None of that seemed to matter to all those people. What? Why? You're going to get it next, so she gets it first.
I can't claim this as my own thought. I read it in one of many articles that I was trying to read this morning when I was taking in all of this. But someone said something to the effect of many people thought that neither candidate was the greatest. There were a lot of people out there who didn't trust Hillary Clinton, a lot of people out there who didn't trust Donald Trump. But the article that I read, it struck me because it said that folks decided to go with the person they didn't trust, but told it to you in your face.
I see. So that it was obvious. Listen, you don't have to trust me. I was shocked, by the way. Don't go away. I'm going to get to you on that same question. But I was shocked that every single thing that came up, he turned around and said, well, she did it. He even said in a debate, she wants to build the wall. I'm like, wait a minute, I had never heard that. Every single thing, and people just bought it, and it didn't matter.
And that's a scary thing for somebody who is going to be running this country, to whenever someone puts the blame on them, they turn the blame to someone else. There's no accountability there, and that's a scary thing.
But again, going around, turning the tables, right? Like, she's a career politician, and he was convincing people around that. I'm no politician. She made decisions. She had 20 plus years, as a chance to change things, and she didn't. That was his rhetoric.
Although in her position as Secretary of State and as a New York State Senator, it's a heck of a charge to put on her to say, why didn't you change things?
Yes.
I mean, you can look at maybe her specific record, but to blame the entire economy
but she's part of the status quo. She's part of the, of the machine, then that's what people saw in her. She's part of these, establishment that we don't want. And that's what he spoke to.
I want to go back to that same question. So you travel in high level circles, and you meet a man who commands some respect, and yet you find out in his background he has maybe harassed women or had made some statements that would make you uncomfortable if you were at a party with this person, or listen, we can't verify everything. And of course he right away says, I didn't do it, they're just lies. You not only would not go next to that person, you certainly, I'm making an assumption here, you certainly wouldn't vote for them to represent you in a position of responsibility. Why did those issues not resonate with women? Because they talked about women who did not have college educations as coming out overwhelmingly in favor of Donald Trump. Why does that not resonate with them?
I just don't comprehend.
When I saw
that number of like 42% of women voted for Donald Trump, I was just stunned. I couldn't even believe it. That why would women vote for him? And I guess maybe it's just in the past and people don't really feel identified with it. They were even questioning a lot of these women that came forward, accusing him of sexual assault and all kinds of matters, because 20 years later you don't have the right to come and say, oh, he did touch me. But and I guess maybe that resonated within a lot of people.
So then people were like, oh, he's being accused because
because the position he's trying to get. And that's exactly what brought women forward. This is the next president of the United States, and he touched me 20 years ago. This is my time to say that. And I guess a lot of people did not buy
They didn't buy
that.
it.
Yes.
Or they wanted so badly to believe that it was the political status quo that caused this problem, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe the most significant piece of Bronx investigative political journalism in many years was put out in City and State magazine by Serena Trangle. She came on our show in early December. Let's hear what she had to say. Tonight, I am absolutely thrilled beyond belief because I read an article in City and State magazine or paper or whatever you want to call it, which I thought was maybe the most significant piece of political journalism that we have had in the Bronx in many, many years. My guest is like going, all right. But I really think it's true. And as you know, and as she knows, I probably read all of the Bronx political material that's out there. Congratulations to Serena Trangle for this article, Are You on the Bronx County Committee? Nice to have you with us, Serena.
Thank you.
This is, as I have established, and I'll try not to be too enthusiastic, but as a Bronx journalist and somebody in Bronx media, I really was pleased with the level of journalism and the work that you put into it. Before we even talk about it, just a little bit about your background so people could know who Serena is, and then we'll really break this thing down.
So my name is Serena Trangle. I work at City and State. It's a political magazine. It's a weekly publication, and we focus on what's going on at City Hall in New York City and the state government, and also Buffalo, Western New York area.
Right.
So.
You have some Bronx journalistic roots in that you worked at the Riverdale Press. You were talking to me before that you worked in Queens, all that kind of stuff. She's been around. She knows what's happening, and if you don't believe me, check out this remarkable piece. So this is, I guess it all started in one would think a somewhat nondescript residence on Davidson Avenue at 2401 Davidson Avenue. Before we even get into that, talk to me about what county committees are, what the rules are, why we have county committees, and then, of course, we'll get into what the allegations are.
Okay, so county committees are the most local level of political party organizations. So if you're familiar with the DNC, and you might be, given how much issues there were this election, it's sort of the local counterpart of that. So in this state, any major political party can organize on a county level. The idea is that basically people who are registered with that party can elect representatives to this body, the committee, and those representatives will represent them and let them have a say in how the party runs. So they, do things like set rules about how things are going to function, select leaders who have a significant amount of power. I think probably the most influence county organizations have is if somebody resigns or for another reason is all of a sudden no longer in office, the county organizations are allowed to, if there's going to be a special election, if there's not time for a primary where that's normally how you would pick your candidate, they just get to pick the candidate. And I think about a third of state legislators have been elected that way. So,
how many members on the county committee in the Bronx has this been? Because of course the allegations are always that it's top-down managed. Has the county committee members, or have the county committee members been effective in adjusting the direction of the party?
Well, have they been effective? I mean,
prior to this investigation, in other words, has it really been a democratic process? The allegations that we've all heard and we've covered for many years is that many people believe it's been top down.
Yeah, I mean, that is definitely the allegation. That seems to be, in my reporting, people had that impression. I think that's also a complaint you hear in other boroughs. But yeah, there are, as I think you also asked about how many members there are. So in New York City, every assembly district is carved up into a couple block areas, and they're called election districts. That's how you get assigned to a voting machine. So every election district has 2 to 4 representatives on the county organization, and that would give the Bronx the opportunity to have about 2,500 county committee members, and they currently have 66% of those full, I think, off the top of my head, which is actually much higher than other boroughs.
Well, that was one of the things that did come out here, that we have 60% of the essentially 2,500 filled. Other boroughs have less?
Yes.
Is either a concern, or this is really how things go in New York State politics?
Well, we wanted to, just given that we heard about the lawsuit, and then as we looked at the evidence submitted in the lawsuit, we wanted to sort of get a general look of if the county organizations were fulfilling their mission and sort of being a representative body. And I noticed that there is a state law that the organizations have to have 25% of their possible seats filled via an election. So I wanted to look at the vacancy rates. I think it is, some people might say it's not a concern, this wouldn't have legal standing, they want a bright line between the government telling political parties how to run, but I think there is concern. People have had issues in running their parties because they have so many vacancies. Obviously, when you have a lawsuit alleging that you have sort of straw candidates put in and straw county committee members put in because that's allegedly, how you can control the party and make it work for you, that's also not a good look. I would say they're both concerns.
So now let's go to 2401 Davidson Avenue, and if you read, this is right at the top of the article. If you read it right at the beginning, you're like, wait a minute, this can't be right. Is that you discovered that maybe there were 20 people from one building on the county committee, and then you went and interviewed 1 or 2 of them? So those are just some of the many highlights in our first 9 months of the Bronx Buzz. We want to thank you for being part of the Buzz during our first year of life. We look forward to serving you with more buzzing and an inside look at Bronx journalism as we get into the new year. We want to thank our producer, Jayla Jubetis, and our directors, Michael and Bianca, even Whitney, who's helping out here in the studio behind the camera, and really to everybody in the Bronx, Happy New Year.